pleasure to be here with these esteemed panelists. And we came onto this conversation and proposing this from the work that we've all been doing either adjacent to or with each other around Great Salt Lake. And the thing I'll say from the outset is the title here says that this is a case study. And sometimes we suggest that case studies it's a packaged up thing. It happened in the past. It is all about best practices or the worst or the things you should or shouldn't do. And I would say that we should flip that script a little bit and say this is an open case study because it's really only just begun. There's so much work to do, as has probably already been reiterated by many folks that we all interact with over and over again. I would say not ad nauseum, but should be ad infinitum until we feel that we're stable. And we thought it is outside the role that faith communities can be playing in action on the Great Salt Lake and on other ecological issues around the world, but sometimes is underappreciated how outsized that role is. We want to talk a little bit about that today. We have folks from representing 4 different faith communities and belief systems to do that. So what I'm first going to do is just read you a little bit about the panelists that we have here and let them introduce themselves, their own stewardship ethic, and then we'll talk a little bit about what they have done in their own faith communities to spark action on Great Salt Lake. And then we're going to spend the majority of the time actually sourcing our questions that we're asking the panel from you all. So we're going to start that right now. Let's test it. If you have your phones or a device that can work a QR code or on your computer, join on the Slido. And the question we want to ask you is, and also, do you think religious affiliation makes people more likely or less likely to engage in environmental issues? Ooh. Let's see. Less likely, more likely. It looks like less likely has got a pretty good supermajority here. Creeping up a little bit. Oh, big. Yeah, it got bigger. Yeah, so this was we did kind of put you into a false binary, didn't we? Because the answer is likely. It depends, isn't it? And there's a lot more nuance here, and we're going to talk about that. So most folks are thinking less likely. If you are in the United States context, if you're in the Intermountain West context, that is a pretty understandable thing. Now, many might be familiar with the Pew Research Center. The Pew Research Center did a massive study, and they continue to do this massive study on religiosity in the United States and in the country. And they looked at a wide variety of things about how people's religious beliefs or lack thereof relate to their beliefs about politics, about the hot button social issues of the day, about what concerns them in their communities. And there is a section on environmental stewardship. And the interesting thing about this study is that when you look at it, and when you say, they give you the statement, God gave humans a duty to protect and care for the earth, including plants and animals among adults in Utah. And they also did this in the United States level. Vast majority, actually quite a supermajority, say yes, absolutely. And that can be surprising sometimes for people. If you come from faith communities where the dominant narrative is a narrative of domination, you kind of might say, well, I don't know. I don't know if that's really my Sunday school lessons that I had growing up, right? But in fact, most of the U.S. population also believes this. Now, the interesting paradox about that is when you start to look in things like regulation, or when you start to use words like climate or climate change, or things that I'll call them a post-inconvenient truth terms, it starts to trigger people, and they would say, not be quite as responsive about this. And this is very much, in the many people we've talked to globally, a uniquely American problem of these religions, and it's very specifically in the American West, super pronounced. This is interesting because in this state in particular, we have is majority religious, and the majority of the religious practices are of one specific religion. But we have many here, and all of them have their own narratives of creation, their narratives of our duty to care for the earth, the narratives of what our unique role might be as humans in this ecosystem. And at the same time, we have things that might be splitting those, or might feel that they're compartmentalized or that they shouldn't be put together in things such as environmental regulation or actual action on it. And maybe they're just belief in faith professions in and of themselves. So we have here some wonderful folks to delve into this question. Rabbi Samuel Spector, who is from the Congregation Kalami, Reverend Scott Wipperman, who is from the Trinity Presbyterian Church right here in Ogden, and Darren Parry, who is the former board of the Northwestern Band of Shoshone Nation and also practicing Latter-day Saint. And myself, I'm also, as the head of Latter-day Saint or Stewardship, I'm practicing Latter-day Saint, and kind of maybe not obviously am representing that perspective. So what I want to start with is the question of, for us to get to know you and where your belief system comes on inspiring you to care for environmental issues. And we'll talk about specifically Great Salt Lake in another round, but the first thing I want to talk about is just higher order. What is it that your belief foundation teaches about our stewardship? What's your own personal journey been in that? And how has it brought you to care for these issues and to try to inspire action in your own congregations as leaders in those, or in the community groups in which you're in? Let's go ahead and start with Reverend.
Okay. Thank you. Do I need to use that?
Yeah, maybe let's do that. Let's pass the mic.
I'm short. I'll stand up. I might just stand on my chair, actually, here for you to see me. But Genesis 1, we have the creation story, the 6 days of creation. God separated light from dark, waters above, the waters below. We get to day 6, where he creates man and woman in his own image. And then he tells them to go out and multiply, fill the earth. And then there's these words like rule and dominion that pop up in this. And I think that many of us, you hear dominion and we think of domination, rule. Quite often, maybe from our early days in school, we had a rather authoritarian teacher that ruled over the classroom. And we might have these, what I would call, more authoritative or negative connotations of those two words. And unfortunately, one of the things that came out of this is we came up with this, unfortunately, somewhat horrible word called nature. If you look at the definition of nature, it says it's the world, all the things that are in the world, the plants, the animals, and then there'll be a comma. And it says, except humans and things that humans create. And this, unfortunately, I think has created a schism of us seeing ourselves separate from the world. Most native language, most indigenous natives, their languages don't have a word for nature because they don't see themselves separate from the world. They are part of the world. And I think that's part of what, if we take a look at these terms from a more of an over perspective, from a faith perspective of what the entire gospel is telling us about, we move away from these authoritative views more towards a stewardship view, more towards a nurturing, a developing, a growing, as opposed to any kind of oppressive view. And that's what I think has really formed mine. And I think our faith's role in this is we are here to care for this. We are here responsible for our actions in this world. We are here to help build it and make it something even greater, not consume it and use it up.
Rabbi?
Well, ditto on Genesis 1, how we are taught that we are supposed to rule over the earth and subdue it. We can look at that in a couple of ways. Is it ours to exploit, or is it ours to care for? I agree with the Reverend, obviously. Otherwise, I'd be a bad panelist for this session. But beyond that, an important concept in Judaism is what's called Baal Tashbit, which means literally being a master over wastefulness. And we read in the Torah that when you go to war, that you are not supposed to destroy your enemy's fruit tree bearing trees. And the reason it says is that those trees are not your enemies. And this is wasteful. And so we're not supposed to be wasteful. And even in Judaism, when we die, we are buried in a wooden box that is then put in the earth, and we are not embalmed, so that we can return to the earth and be a part of it. One other thing that um, also, in Judaism, we have, as I approach next month, my first ever sabbatical, we also give our trees sabbaticals. We are not supposed to pick from a tree for the first 3 years of the tree's life. And then every 7 years, we are supposed to, we're supposed to let the trees have a year where they're not picked and the fruit falls naturally off the tree to give it a year to recover. And so if you go to Israel, you will see entire farms that are cordoned off because it says that it's the 7th year of that, what's called the Shemitah year. It says Shemitah on there. But finally, the last thing I'll say is I think about a story in the Talmud, and it's of this guy named Honi. And Honi one day is walking around, and he sees this elderly man planting a carob sapling. And he's asked him, "Oh man, what's your name?" He says, "My name's David." He says, "David, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm planting a carob tree." He says, "David, don't you know that those take 70 years to produce carobs?" And he goes, "Yeah, what's your point?" He goes, "You're going to be dead by the time that this produces carobs. Why are you doing this?" And the guy kind of shrugs, and Coney walks off and says, "What a crazy old guy." And then he goes and he takes a nap. And this nap lasts 70 years. And he gets up from his 70-year nap. He's walking back, and he sees where this sapling been planted, this mighty carob tree. And there's a man who's picking the carobs. He says, "Hey, what's your name?" And the guy says, "Well, my name's David." He goes, "There's a guy named David who planted this tree." He goes, "Yeah, that was my grandfather." He goes, "Why was he doing that?" I told him, "You're not going to be around to see the carobs, to enjoy the carobs of the tree you're planting." He said, "Yeah, because when he was a child, he loved picking carobs and eating carobs. And he knew that he got to do that because people before him planted them so that he could enjoy them one day. And so that this was what he needed to do so that I could have this one day too." So that's what we always need to think of, is how we need to be a people with vision when it comes to the world, not about what's convenient today. And also how we are stewards of this earth and also masters over wastefulness.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here at my alma mater. I graduated from Weber State University in '83. So it's good to be back. As you mentioned, I'm a practicing LDS member. 10 years after the Bear River Massacre in 1863, all of the survivors ended up being baptized into the Mormon Church. And so I'm a sixth generation Shoshone Latter-day Saint. So I have a unique perspective. But way before I knew anything about the church, I was going on plant walks with my grandmother, May Timbuktu, at Antelope Island, and where we'd make a visit to where I just recently lived in the Cache Valley, to harvest choke cherries down by Paradise and Avon. Those early interactions with nature formed the basis of my spirituality. So while I identify as a Latter-day Saint, I really identify with that Native American culture and that Native American spirituality. When your grandmother tells you, she introduces you to a plant and she sings the song of the plant, and she tells me that the water and the rocks and all things that are around us have spirits. I grew up with a different worldview. Well, if they have a spirit, aren't they really similar to us then? And she made no distinction between us and everything else. We were all the same. And so I grew up looking at that differently, and not looking at nature as something that I could exploit or take advantage of. Way before I knew anything about the LDS Church, I was pretty grounded in what that relationship with nature should look like. And you're right. There's no word for nature or wilderness in Native American languages because we grew up just knowing that we're part of the system. Not better, not one iota higher, but on equal footing and equal ground. And if you look at the world that way, don't you treat things differently? If you looked at nature as and land and plants and rocks and water, not as a commodity that we can exploit or develop or destroy, but we look at it as a relative that we need to nurture and care for, then I think our relationship with that becomes different and our decisions are different. And so that's where I'm grounded. I mean, today I might want to represent 20% being LDS. Well, identify as that. I think there's a lot of problems and a lot of things that we need to work on. But and more 80% from a Native American spirituality perspective, because I think if we're going to save this world, and I think we will, it's going to have to come with some of that spirituality and start looking at things from a different view.
Thank you. Really appreciate those perspectives, and you're really right, Darren. I think that's kind of one of the next things I want to delve into is that we talk about belief systems, right, and the sort of theological underpinnings that we have when we're approaching something like our relationship with the earth and how we can be better stewards. Then we have the institutional churches or groups that we have. That creates a whole different level of complexity because we have our beliefs and the ideals, and then we have humanity, which is in a state of, I would say, perpetual unidealness. And it's messy. We have a lot of things we have to do. And this is just one of the many, many different things happening in the world that a church, a tribe, a community, a politic, a government could do better on. So it can often, I think, get away from us, and we can put psychological distance between seeing this whole mountain of things globally that need to be done and seeing what's the next best step that I can do as a person, that I can do with my neighbors and in my own congregation here in my own backyard. So let's jump now to that on the Great Salt Lake. I would love to know what's going on in your congregations or in your faith groups in the communities in which you work on this, and where might you see it going in the future? I can say that we have a lot of things going on with our own nonprofit, and maybe from the institutional church perspective, there's many things I know that are going on. Since I don't speak for the church, I can only just say the things I know that are public information, and probably many people know in here. One of the things was the church a few years ago made a 20,000 acre feet perpetual donation to the Great Salt Lake. That is a really amazing step. And sometimes for those that are not super skilled up on your water measurement, that can, like, what is that acre feet, right? So roughly, imagine that you have an entire football field and there's a foot of water covering that whole football field. Now multiply that by 20,000. That's a lot of water. It's also only a small drop in the bucket of the amount of water that is needed to get to the lake to put it back to a healthy level. But that does not, we don't want to pass over the significance of that. And that was one of the first moves that's happened in the past few years of many other things. There's legislation that's been put out there. And from what I understand, hopefully the church is saying there's more where that came from. And we want as many people to be involved in that. Another thing that I know of as being integrated is the looking at facilities. Churches control immense amounts of private land, and they have facilities which they're maintaining. Those facilities tend to have landscapes. And in Utah, those landscapes tend to be disproportionately covered in turf grass that is overwatered throughout many seasons. So a small adjustment, such as integrating a smart controller to those facilities, can make a huge difference. And they're projecting that it'll save millions of gallons of water, and many of those which are within the Great Salt Lake Basin. An amazing act, and something that I think can snowball upon itself. And then there's even just the higher order things, which I was recently informed of is in the church handbook, which is the handbook the whole church leadership and members are looking to for guidance on what does the church believe and what should we be doing on any given kind of issue. And they recently added a section on environmental or stewardship, and that we have this duty scripturally, spiritually, and mandate from leadership in order to be stewards of the earth. And that it is not just some pet project of one subdivision in the church, but is rather part of the central core and should be part of that. That is a really cool, important step. It might just be a paragraph and a half, but that's not nothing. And there's something to be said about that, and there's something to be acted upon on that. And I find that to be really inspiring. And I also find it to be overwhelming, thinking of, okay, so how can I then, in a institutional body that has not only 16, 17 million members globally, and has all these different ways, everybody has their own lives in those congregations, and they've got worries, they've got things that they need to worry about on a day-to-day, and they might not necessarily be thinking about, how can I get some more acre feet of water to the Great Salt Lake? How do we then do that? What does that look like? So I'm curious to know, what does that look like at your level, and what you all are seeking?
To begin with, I think one of the things is to spread the message of stewardship. It's something that from a national church organization and from my particular church, it's something we talk about frequently. Stewardship of many things, but particularly of our environment, of our land, our water, our air. And there can be some lack of initiative at times, and sometimes this is where I think we come together. We're together as a body of people gathering, and so it's easier to get this body of people to move and do something. Sometimes as simple as, let's put a bunch of postcards out on the tables during the fellowship time that have pre-addressed with our representatives' addresses on them, and have people write notes to our state or our federal representatives about the concerns we have with these issues. And something as simple as that, to get people to be participative, to be people to take some actions, and then to encourage them as well as in their private lives. How do we, once we step outside the church, what do we do? How do we live our own lives? And as a church, many of the churches in the community have installed solar panels on the roof, taken measures to reduce their water usage. Our church, particularly, we're up next to the mountains. We have a large homeless center for four-legged creatures. We left most of our property native and don't water most of it. And so we do have some attacked deer. So be careful if you come to our place. But there's actions like this that I think we can take as a community to help vitalize people to take actions where they maybe weren't active before. What can they do in their personal life to reduce their carbon footprint, as well as what are we doing in our communal life to help reduce our carbon footprint? So those are some of the actions that we're taking as to keep this message up in front of people and raise the awareness as far as the outlooking to how do we care for not only the people within the walls, but outside the walls. What are we doing to care for those and for the future generations that will come?
Thank you. Now, I mean, we've done a couple things in our community, like some of us went to a protest at the Capitol where I guess we dressed up as brine shrimp or had brine shrimp puppets or something. I don't know. Wasn't there? But a number of our folks did that. And we also did a great screening of the film Whales of the High Desert, which talks about the issue of the Great Salt Lake, and had Representative Doug Owens, who represents our synagogue in the legislature. This has been a big passion for him. Come and speak and have a service dedicated to that. And we also have xeriscaped a lot of our facility and our parking lot to try and reduce amount of water we use. Now, here's one of the things though that I often tell folks, we can learn from other people is the thing. And in Jewish texts, we read that it's not on us to complete the work, but we're also obliged not to negate it. and we have to do our part. And as Jews, we have a very strong connection to the state of Israel, which in America, Utah happens to have what we call America's Dead Sea here with Great Salt Lake. And the Dead Sea in Israel is facing a very similar problem of disappearing rapidly. And in Israel, it's a tiny country without much fresh water. And the Sea of Galilee, which is actually a freshwater lake, was declining rapidly, is the main source of water, which also feeds the Dead Sea. And back in the 60s, the Syrian government actually created a plan in order to destroy Israel of trying to reroute the rivers that feed the Sea of Galilee and destroy Israel that way. But Israel found out and destroyed the plan. So with that said, today, I read all that out to say that Israel realized that if they didn't learn water conservation, that the country would be destroyed. Today in the United States, we recycle. You might know what percentage of water we recycle in the United States. Less than 1% of the water we use. Israel recycles 90% of the water that they use. When I lived in Israel, people would, when they were washing their forks or plates or whatever in the sink, they would turn on the sink, wash the plate, turn it off, grab the next plate, turn it on the sink, wash the plate, turn it off. And they do that over and over. And it was ingrained in these people's memories, like it was a muscle reflex for them. And if I was wasting water, they would scream at me. Israel also leads the world in desalinization and invented drip irrigation. I could go on and on and on but Israel has become the world's leader in water conservation and now went from a country without water to creating a water surplus where they create more water than they use every year. And when they've engaged in peace talks with their neighbors, that's been part of the negotiations as well, is to share that technology. So something that we have done with those contacts that we have over in Israel is we have pushed the governor's office and Joel Parry, who's in charge of the natural resources there, to engage with Israel and to learn from them. And we did a few years ago a trade mission to Israel that was largely based on water that Joel Parry went on. And an MOU was created as a result of that to share water technology. And so that's something that we've worked hard on as a community and pushing that as well. There was supposed to be another trade mission next month, but it's been canceled. So because of the war. So, but that's something that we push as well. And then finally, the last thing I'd say, or pass over to Darren, is that so I moved here from Southern California, which was experiencing drought. And people were talking about how do we deal with the drought over in California. And people were saying, well, maybe I'll stop showering and stuff like that. I said, no, please shower. They said the best thing that you can do to reduce the drought in California, and probably here as well, is cut meat out of your diet one day a week. I didn't realize this, but eating 1 pound of 1 pound of hamburger meat, it takes about 1,800 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of hamburger meat. And so what I've encouraged my colleagues to do is start keeping kosher, eating kosher meat, or eating plant-based meat substitutes like Impossible Burgers or something like that. Because if you do either of those things, you will reduce the amount of meat that you're eating and dramatically reduce the amount of water consumption we're creating.
I'm going to speak for the next couple of minutes on maybe an indigenous perspective and not the LDS perspective so much. I think we need to reframe the problem. And part of the problem with being here today and during the keynote and other things, I've had a thought. We're sitting here learning how to live sustainably in a system that's not sustainable. I mean, let me just say it like that. This conference is wonderful and it's needed.
Darren, that's not fair. I brought my own lanyard.
There you go. You do.
But I have that reoccurring nightmare maybe in my head that we're learning ways to live more sustainably in a system that is not sustainable. It's just not. And so, look, we need the best science in the world. We need innovation. That is critical, but we're not going to science our way out of this. We're not going to innovate our way out of it because it's not a science problem. It's a values problem. And all the science in the world won't make up for our selfish behaviors. And so how do we look at the problem differently? Every one of you can list 10 things to conserve water and to get more water to the lake. I mean, that's not the problem here. Well, why don't we do it? We don't do it because we value other things. We value things that society has said is important. And maybe not society in general, the people, the elitists, the people at the very top of the pyramid are saying this is what's important. And so until we reframe the problem to our value systems and how do we change those value systems? And from an indigenous perspective, we grew up with those value systems, looking at the earth as a sacred relative and not a commodity. Living in reciprocity with the earth. And more important even than that is, like my Iroquois friends, thinking 7 generations ahead. I think if we did that, if our leadership did that, if they didn't make one decision until they considered what effect that decision would have on 7 generations down the road, I think our decisions would be completely different than they are today. Look, I'm not anti-development at all, but I'm anti-right development. And I think we ought to start asking harder questions when we decide to create this monstrosity of a data center that might use a lot of water. I mean, tons of water in a place where we have no business using a ton of water. And so I just think our decisions need to be grounded in a value system that my people has always lived with, and returning to the old ways, returning to the old agreements, not the ones written on paper, but the ones that were made with the plants and the animals. And there's such beautiful stories that my grandmother told me on how to live in right relationships with all of our human and non-human kinfolk.
Thank you. Appreciate this perspectives a lot. So what we're going to do now is actually we've got, well, it's about 22 minutes, right? Sit down. And so we actually want this to be an open conversation. So we're going to have folks join in, ask some questions to the panelists, and we'll kind of do some round robining here and try and figure that out. And while you're doing that and putting your questions in, I want to actually go back to what you were saying, Darren, because I'm curious to know a little bit about are there things that are currently happening in the Shoshone Nation and or in the areas in which they all are operating where trying to flip that script, trying to bring those value systems back and inject it in there? Is there any sort of lessons that you feel like we can learn from that? Or if there's not currently, what could be done there?
I think one of the biggest things I could point to now is the restoration work that we're doing at the Parry massacre site. You don't realize this, but we were not, because we joined the church, we were not given a reservation. So not having land as a tribe was an important thing. And in 2018, we were able to purchase 700 acres at the massacre site. And so those bodies were never buried. And they're just beneath the surface. So it was a sacred place for us. But I just felt as the chairman at the time, before you can tell the story of the people, you really need to tell the story of the land. and looking at the land that it over the last 150 years had been degraded, invasive species. Although my grandmother would say no plant is invasive, they're just a plant that's lost. But looking at the site and seeing 500,000 mature Russian olives, and the scientists tell me the one Russian olive drinks about 70 gallons of water a day, just one. And so restoring the land, removing 500,000 Russian olives, returning water back into the Bear River, which we think will get to the Great Salt Lake, we hope, and replanting cottonwoods and willows, and just restoring that landscape to what it looked like from systems that have been created to erase us, to not only erase the story of what happened that day, but to erase our relationship to land. And so what we're doing is finally being able to tell our story from our unique perspective. But by this restoration work, we're actually healing Mother Earth. We're giving more water to the Bear River, which will give more water to our mother Great Salt Lake. And hopefully that can serve as an example of what communities, local communities can do to make a difference.
It's great. And such a big impact because Bear River has such a lion's share of the flow to Great Salt Lake. So that's and I can't help but think that one site, right? It's just one site along the river of thousands of acres of farm that's owned by farmers or by individual plot owners. Maybe some have been owned by the church, and we sometimes think that, oh, just doing this one little thing right here, it's just nothing. But in the end, really big impacts are the amalgam of many small decisions made on a day-to-day basis. So the fact that you said, look, we could go out and try and figure out all of these different things writ large about what our land ownership looks like, but why don't we start here with this one plot? Because this plot has cultural significance, it has a story to be told, and it also has a lot of things we can do to help steward better. Love that. Okay, I'll also say, by the way, you can upvote, and when that helps me too, because then I can prioritize which of these awesome questions to talk about.
Phil, one quick clarification.
Yes.
We have until 12:20.
12:20. Okay, so we've got 8 minutes. Let's see, and probably more questions than we can answer here. Okay, so I did want to get to that first one I thought, which was good, and we can keep it. And there's no bro here. So how do you respond to people who have the idea that environmental issues are solely in the hands of deity and we don't have to worry? You haven't heard that one before, right? Anyone?
Sure.
Reverend?
Sure. We don't agree with that. Okay. God is a creator. God gives us free will. We get to make choices about what we do, how we live. We are commissioned to be stewards of what we have, and what we have here is this creation. We're commissioned to be stewards of the creation. So it is our job to exercise that stewardship. Is there anybody else that wants to add something?
Yeah.
I just, like you said, Reverend, in Genesis chapter 1 talks about how God gave us the ability to be the stewards, and we're supposed to be partners with God. And so, agree, Rabbi Ram Joshua Eshels would say, pray as if everything depends on God, but act as if everything depends on you. It's got to be a bit of both.
That's great. The kind of a follow-on to that is, and this is, I think, oh no, there's a fiber. Let's get to the fiber there. What are good resources or places to go for more info on how to incorporate more Indigenous practices, Darren?
Read my book.
That's what I was going to say.
I had a book come out just a few months ago called Tending the Sacred, How Indigenous Wisdom Will Save the World. And so it's just it's only 100 pages, but it's teachings that my grandmother taught me and other elders have taught me. So it's information that I've learned over a lifetime of living in reciprocity with this natural world that we live in. And just gives us ways to look at the world a little bit differently. So, and there's many native authors out there today. I can't say that's always been the case, but I think this work has been embraced by many indigenous cultures over the last few years. And uh, Robin Wall Kimmer, if you can't read her book, Bringing Sweetgrass, and take something life changing out of that, you're dead probably. So it's also a couple of two good places to start. But look for indigenous authors because it comes from a place of uh, it's authentic, and so I think that's a great place.
Yeah. I can't count how many times I've recommended Braiding Sweetgrass to people. It's life changing, and now it's becoming a close second in your book. And I'll remind people too. Hopefully we will be having you come and speak to a book club of ours maybe at some point there, and we would love to be in conversation with you about that. If you want to join that, it is a live and open forum for people to have that. And also, I want to point out that you do some great work in teaching as well, and in teaching those ways. So if you happen to be a student that's on campus at Utah State and the U, or both of them, right? Darren teaches that class. That's a good place to learn from the source. There was a question that I thought was worth talking about was what successes have you seen in engaging people with sustainability on a religious or values level rather than one political one? I can share from our perspective, we put out something called a Word Sustainability Guide at Latter-day Saint Stewardship, and it was basically this resource to say, hey, you don't have to go and talk about lobbying or anything like this. You can start in your ward and say, maybe you want to put a sustainability call in here, or maybe you want to have somebody who within facilities can add this little responsibility to what they're doing, helping make sure that there's waste reduction in ward activities or things like that. And it's a very non-threatening way for people to do it. There's also a slew of Sunday school lessons. Those we've seen are really, really impactful, because when you start saying, hey, this is actually not just something that happens over here, or it's not only in your political sphere, but rather it's just something from a values level we can talk about. Just the other week, we were talking about how, hey, Noah, it's in our Come Follow Me lesson this week. Did you know that's an ecological story? We should maybe talk about that a little bit and what our thoughts are and wastefulness in society. There's lots of great ways to do that. What successes have you all seen in your conversation in congregations with that?
Well, I think a misconception is that being environmental costs more money. We have these lights in our sanctuary and social hall, and that were not very energy efficient. But it was going to cost $30,000, $50,000, whatever, to replace them with environmentally friendly ones. So our board was like, no, we can't do that. It's going to cost us money. And I found grants from people out there who care about the environment to help us with that. But then our board really changed their tune once we showed them an environmental impact study that showed within 3 or 4 years, the amount of energy we would save on our electric bill would pay for this project. And that this was, and so doing stuff like that and showing the long-term cost benefit has been helpful to us. And also just doing things where we involve ritual worship. Every year between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we have a ritual called Tashlich, where we toss into the water like breadcrumbs and different things like this to be symbolic, casting away our sins. This year we have our whole congregation very excited because we're doing a reverse Tashlich, where we are going down to the Jordan River and taking things out of the river instead of putting it in. And people are really excited about that.
Yep. Either way, if you have something to say.
Well, and I think a lot of this is just raising the consciousness of people about values, to speaking to that, not necessarily to look at just at policies and what that's going on, but what are the values behind those policies? What are the values of the people that are promoting these various policies? And do we agree with those values or not? And do we agree with, let's examine our own values. What are our actions? What are we valuing? And what do we step back and think about what is more important to value in our lives and in our interactions with one another?
Love that. This is probably our last one, which is that's too bad. The next most upvoted one was, how do you deal with conflicting priorities within your communities? And the way that they word it specifically is, oh, where'd you go? Where'd you go? Come on. Did you get deleted?
Down.
Oh, it's down. It's down. Where am I? Oh, here we go. Do you see conflicting priorities or people within your religious communities that are holding this back? And if so, what do you do with just that? And you kind of suggested some of that already, Reverend. But have you seen this? Conflicting priorities? People that are divided on this?
People love to golf.
Well, I mean, we got like so many golf courses in southern Utah and stuff. People love to golf, and when you talk about taking away, well, hey, if we all just get rid of the golf courses, then you take away something they love. So I mean, you see stuff like that, but like I said, when you show benefit, like what we did with the lights, for example, then those conflicts can sometimes resolve themselves. Maybe our parking lot won't look as pretty, but is there a value here in this? And if you like the Reverend said, one of those values, you could I think get through to some people. Not everybody, but some folks.
I think there's convicting values too with our legislature. I think we hear every year, well, we've done stuff to really save the Great Salt Lake. And in reality, they really haven't done anything to save the Great Salt Lake. They've done a few things to show us that they're making an effort, but they're still protecting the status quo. Nobody's hurting yet. Nobody's going out. So that's going to be painful to have to go through this. And so as long as they're going to continue to protect that status quo, which is developers, ranchers, and those become a priority, I don't think we make real progress, the progress that we could make if they decided that, look, all hands on deck, everything's on the table, and we need to do it different. And we're not there yet. We might be there at the end of this summer. That's one thing we can't predict. What's the next few winters going to look like? So they're going to be forced to do it then. So.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate all of your perspectives, and sorry that we can't get to everyone's questions. I'm so glad to see all of this happening here. So there is one question that was to the rabbi, but I'll just kind of leave this as a rhetorical, as we're.
I'll stick around after.
Yeah, you can stick around after and talk about this. I think that it actually is a pretty global problem, but this asker said Israel uses 6 times less water per capita than we do in Utah, but even Israel hasn't created enough water to protect the Dead Sea.
Yeah.
Its levels at an all-time low. How do we go beyond providing water for human needs to replenishing the earth? And I really like that last question, because I think that especially what a wonderful, uniquely American thing. We always try to quantify things. It's all resources and numbers, right? This is an interesting thing that we do, but I think that question is so good. How do we go beyond this very singular focus that we might have on this issue or that? It could be with the Dead Sea. It could be with the Great Salt Lake. It could be in those issues in and of themselves, adding more nuance and go, how do we go beyond this one metric we're trying to hit into something that is a bigger, more long-term, eternal goal and mission, which is trying to replenish the earth and be in there.
The reason for that, by the way, is mineral harvesting for beauty products and stuff like that too. So again, goes into those like how much do we want to give up golf, or how much do we want to give up our beauty products? Yeah.
Questions and values. And I think that that's so good. And I hope that we can think about that as we're going into it. And whether you are a believer or not, whether you're part of any of these faith communities or not, there's ways that we can, that are interface all the different niches that live in our society and in our communities that we might not be thinking about. So hopefully you can do that. And hopefully these perspectives have been helpful to you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
To our panelists. Let's give them a warm hand.